everyone, and welcome to this episode, very special episode with my grandma. She is so amazing, and I'm really excited for you guys to hear the things that she has to say. They're all very, very special. And thanks again for all your patience. There are some audio technical difficulty things again with this podcast. So thank you guys so much for being so patient and for just being willing to stick with it. So, without any further ado, let's get into the interview. Okay, Grandma.
Hi.
Thanks for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you for asking me. I feel pretty honored to
You're
be part of
welcome.
your podcast.
It's super exciting that we're going to have you. So, I'm super excited to have you on the podcast, Grandma. It's really fun to have you.
Well, it's nice to be with you, Abby.
Yes. I sent Grandma some questions that she's gonna talk to us about. Mainly, we just wanted to, Grandma, I just wanted to get kind of an overview of your life and just be able to talk to you a little bit about growing up and get some advice for all of us, because you've got many, many, many years of good advice and experience.
Well, it's been a great life. I will be happy to share with you.
Awesome.
Hope that what I have to say will be of use to you and others.
I'm sure it's going to be amazing. I'm super excited. Do you want to just give us, should we start just from the beginning?
Yes.
Okay. So how old are you now, Grandma?
I was born in 1941.
Okay.
Just a few months before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
And I was born in Snowflake, Arizona, which is a small town in northern Arizona that was established by the Mormon pioneers of that day. My great-grandfather was the first stake president in that area for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so my roots go really deep in Snowflake, and lots of family and relatives were part of my growing up.
And you still have a lot of relatives in Arizona, right?
I do. A good share of the family have stayed there.
How do you want to tell us a bit about like growing up? How many siblings do you have?
Well, my parents, when we were in Snowflake, they had my oldest brother, and then I have an older sister. Bob was the oldest, and Catherine, and then Elaine was just younger than me, a year and a half, and then Gloria and Norma. And my brother, each time mother had a baby and it was a girl, he kept hoping for a brother, and that just didn't happen until later on, when I was in the 8th grade. We moved from Snowflake to Mesa, Arizona, and my mother was told that maybe having a baby would help with some of her female problems she was having, and she got a boy.
Oh, there we go.
My little brother, Johnny, he was just a wonderful addition to the family, but unfortunately he was only with us for 15 months because he met with an accident where my grandmother didn't know he was missing from the house and backed over him. But the joyful thing about it is that probably because of his passing, he would have probably been the end of the family, but Mother and Dad ended up having 2 more girls. So there's 7 girls and 2 boys in my family. The boys are gone now. My oldest brother, just passed away a couple of years ago. And, of course, little Johnny was gone. But we think about them meeting and being together, and it brings a lot of joy to us.
I'm sure. Do you remember when Johnny passed away? How old were you when that happened?
I was in the 9th. I had just finished 9th grade and was going to be a sophomore in high school. And I remember it very, very vividly. It was a very much of a point in my life that had a great impact on me. because of my parents and my grandmother's faith in a loving Father and the hope of a resurrection and hereafter, it just gave us the determination as a family to live in such a way that we could be united with Him again.
Yeah.
And it's been a great inspiration in our life, our whole life. He was just a unusually wonderful little spirit, and we knew that from the beginning. And I guess he just didn't have to stay long.
Mm-hmm. That was probably, I mean, ninth grade, like you were old enough to remember it happening, but probably that was like the first big tragedy or big life event that you had.
Not really, because I grew up, my grandmother's family, it seemed like we had a lot of experiences through my young years of losing family members and watching the faith of those who were dealing with it, particularly my grandmother, and how she was able to cope with those tragedies. She lost a son when he was 14 years old. He had heart problems, and he died of his heart being weakened when he was a young baby. Neighbors came to visit who had whooping cough, and he caught whooping cough, and it weakened his heart. And he dealt with heart problems and died when he was 14. He was just younger than my mother. There were 9 children in that family. She had, her mother had a stroke when she was a fairly young woman, and my grandmother was the oldest in the family and cared for her. So there had been a lot of things, and I think in that day and age that was probably pretty typical. People were much closer to death and to loss, and they learned how to use their faith and their trust in a Heavenly Father who loves them, and Jesus Christ, who is our Savior, to soften those losses and give them hope and courage to go on. And I think that really has been such a foundational part of my growing up and my life. And I was part of families of pioneers on both sides who gave up so much for what they considered the gospel in their life and the gospel of Jesus Christ, that it was such a foundational part of my growing up. And I lived among people who were just found, they were very much, that was the foundation of their whole life. And they lived it in a way that was a great example to me. And I always felt like it was incumbent upon me to stay faithful to their sacrifices, to honor them. Mm-hmm. And I've it's not ever been hard for me to believe and to be able to trust Heavenly Father. And I've always felt like I was a child of God and a daughter of Heavenly Father who had great worth. And I think it's made me not have to suffer some of the anxiety and fears. I have them, of course, but that's the way that I cope with them.
Mm-hmm. And so you had a lot of really awesome examples, it sounds like, growing up with your extended family. And did you guys talk a lot about like your pioneer ancestors growing up?
We did, because we lived in a town that was just full of this people who had common ancestors, and we would have reunions every year. And I would go and hear the stories that were being told by the people in some of them would have, they were contemporaries. My great-grandfather were contemporaries of Brigham Young, and many of the apostles would come to visit in Snowflake and stay in their home. And so they got to know many of the early leaders of the church in a very intimate way. And and so those stories were told to me from the time I was small, and were great inspiration and examples to me of courageous, kind, loving, good people who were willing to do most anything for their fellow men. And so I was inspired by them.
That's awesome. Would you say that like church was a big part of your life? Like when you think about your childhood, is that like the biggest thing you remember was things so focused around church and family, or what other kinds of things do you remember?
Well, we lived in a community that we had a lot of activities going on. I remember going swimming at the old swimming pool with the frogs and with the moss on the sides of the thing, and we played softball in the street. We played kick the can and all kinds of games with the neighbors and friends. But church was the center of that community. There's no question about it. And even the movie theater in town, we had budget tickets that the families could buy a budget ticket to go to the movies, and they would have a movie on Wednesday and on Saturday. We'd go the kids would go at 5 o'clock to the movie, and the parents at 7 o'clock. And the thing that I remember very clearly about that and how exciting it was to have the movie day was on Saturdays. That was the big incentive to get our work and get our baths and get ourselves ready for Sunday, so that we would be ready to go to the movie at 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, yeah.
And that was our big incentive. We knew that if we got our work done and our chores all done, we had cows, we had chickens, we had pigs in the yard, and we had big gardens. So we had a lot of chores, picking up shifts to run the stove and the furnace. We had electricity in our house when I lived after my grandparents moved away, and my grandfather had died of a heart attack. My parents bought the family home that had been built by my grandfather and my uncles, and we lived there until I was in the 8th grade, from the time I was in the 3rd grade till the 8th grade. And we had wood stove, we had wood furnace, and I remember how cold the house would get when the fire would go out before I got home from school some days. And I would sit on the vents and put a blanket over me and read books as I got home from school, because my mother, for some years, occasionally would teach school. She and my dad were both school teachers. But we had a very, very happy growing up in Snowflake. It was just, we could roam the streets, we could go wherever we wanted without fear. We knew that if we did something that we weren't supposed to do, probably somebody who was related to us would call our parents and let them know. So it helped us to keep in line without, but we didn't have the pressure of it. It wasn't that we were being pressured to be anything. We were just pretty much free to be ourselves and go where we wanted and do what we wanted. And our respect and our love for our parents and knowing what they expected of us was what kept us out of trouble for the most part. Even as a teenager, they wouldn't give me instruction, they wouldn't tell me what to do, but I knew what they expected, and I didn't want to disappoint them because I loved them.
So you had a pretty good relationship with your parents growing up?
I did. They were busy folks because they had so many kids and they were busy. They, had a lot of things to do. They were active in the church and had church jobs. And my dad was a coach as well as a teacher. So he would be gone when he was a basketball coach. He had been a basketball star in college, and that's where my parents met, was at Flagstaff at the college there. He had a basketball scholarship and was one of the star players. And my mother fell in love with him playing off.
How can you not?
She described him as being a player like John Stockton.
Oh.
That was the player she told me he was most like.
Yeah.
So if you can envision John Stockton.
So how could she not fall in love with him
That's
watching
right.
him play
He was
basketball?
a handsome guy.
Yeah.
But she was a beauty too.
Yeah. Do you think your relationship with your parents stayed pretty consistent throughout your life, or do you remember, like, because I know when I was a teenager, my parents and I kind of clashed a little bit. Do you feel like it was like that at all, or?
I did never feel that way at all with my parents. I always felt like they loved and supported me. But our relationship was much different than parent-child relationships today, because in those days, parents were not expected by their children to be at every activity and every performance and everything they did. In fact, I don't remember hardly at all that my parents were present at the things I was doing in high school. I was in the Rabette, they called it. We were the Rabettes. We were a marching group, and I was one of the line leaders for the marching group. And I was just thinking one day, I don't believe they ever came to a football game or a basketball game and saw me perform. And it was no big deal because nobody's parents were doing that at that time. They just were busy with their own families at home. The mothers were mostly stay-at-home mothers, and they were there taking care of the home and being there. And you knew when you came home, they would be there to greet you and talk to you about what you were doing. But I think expectations of us as children, especially in a huge family like that with 9 children, was not that we would have them to ourselves or have so much personal attention from our parents. We didn't expect that, and we didn't rely on it because we had this wider circle of family that we were part of that supported us. And even within the family itself, some of my best friends were my sisters. I, at least when I was in elementary school and growing up in Snowflake, that was the case. We would do all kinds of things together. I had an older sister who was very creative, and she would have us put on shows and plays, and we would play. She had an imagination that was wonderful, and we would put on plays, and we'd have a family night every week, and a lot of it consisted on us as children performing and doing things. And I learned all these epic poems like Creation of Sam McGee and Casey at the Bat and The Highwayman. And my dear family listened to me give those long recitations of those poems over and over again, and were very kind to never complain. And so we all played musical instruments. My mother was a wonderful pianist, and we had piano lessons, we had dancing lessons, I played the violin when I was young, and my sisters played the violin and cello and viola. My mother played the piano, and we did quartets of those kind of instruments, and we would play for wedding receptions and other things when I was a teenager. So we had a lot of music in our home. That was one of the main things. And we would sing around the piano together with my mother. That's one of my favorite memories.
So your parents, I mean, with 9 kids, that's a lot to juggle, going to different events and stuff. And they were very involved in your guys' lives, just not necessarily at every single thing you guys were doing. But everybody knew what was going on with each other.
Yeah. Well, there had to be quite a bit of coordination.
I'm sure.
Felt like she was the captain of a lot of things. And my dad was always a wonderful father. He was very supportive and very a wonderful father. He had a great sense of humor that just absolutely delighted my mother. And one of my favorite memories of growing up was at Christmas, when my dad would always get my mother a new dress, and he would pick it out, and that was I can remember getting her, opening her present and being so thrilled about it, and knowing how much my dad loved my mother as being my favorite part of Christmas.
That's so sweet. That's a good memory. What else do you remember about like being in high school? You said you were in the Rabettes, which is awesome.
Well, and I was in student government. We had a Gotzel club, and we had I was in honor society, and I was in, um, well, I ran for club commissioner, which was the part of the student government that ran all the student clubs, and I had to get them all set up for the year and get their charters. I guess they each had a charter for their club, and that was my role on the student council. And I was that when I was a senior and went to. And I also was I ran for a couple of offices in one, but that was the main one that I remember. We got to travel and go to different schools and do conventions and things, and that was a great experience for me.
Yeah.
To do that.
And then after high school, you went to college.
I went to ASU I had an academic scholarship to ASU, but I was a little bit unsettled about what I wanted to get a degree in.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I had always been interested in secretarial kind of work, and I had worked as a secretary for my uncle the summer before I went to college at his Arizona house moving company.
Mm-hmm.
I was there. I was the only female in the whole place, and he had these workers who were kind of rough old guys, but they were so kind and sweet to me and treated me so well. And I enjoyed answering the phones and greeting people that came to the company there. And so I decided to take the executive secretary course at Arizona State, which was a 2-year course. And I enjoyed my classes. When I was younger, I thought I wanted to be a teacher like my parents, but I had a particular teacher who asked me one time if I was going to be a teacher like my folks. And the way he asked me made me kind of feel like I'm not going to do it. And so I kind of made up my mind then and there that I wasn't going to be a teacher, but I probably would have enjoyed being a teacher, and that was a silly reason not to pursue that. But it turned out that actually being a secretary became a great blessing in my life, because when my first husband, who was your grandpa, Bonnie, went to Missouri to get his degree and to get a PhD, I ended up typing dissertations to help bring in income, and that was how I worked while he was in school, and I did lots and lots of those. I'd do it at night while the kids were in bed, but that became a great help. And then I typed his dissertation probably 5 different times.
As he edited it and everything.
As it got more and more perfected, and he ended up, it became a published book. It was a history of the Deseret News, which is the first newspaper that the church had in Utah. And he wrote the history of that, and it was published after we came to Utah.
And tell me a little bit how you met Grandpa.
Okay, well, that was when I was going to Arizona State, and he had returned from his mission. He went on a mission to Uruguay and was one of the very first missionaries into Peru. And he had come from his mission, and he had actually been briefly engaged to a high school classmate of mine. So I kind of knew about him through that. But we met playing ping pong at the Institute, and I could beat him, and I think that kind of made him interested in me, because he was used to winning.
Yes, he was intrigued by you.
Yeah. So, and he called me and invited me to go to a movie. And I got the impression that I was kind of the last one he had called, so I wasn't very excited about going with him. And I remember purposely even wearing something I wasn't too fond of because I thought he had kind of a reputation, I guess, because of this broken engagement and stuff. But to my surprise, I found how much I enjoyed being with him. He was a funny, funny man, but he did it with such a straight face, and it was such dry humor that I really was completely taken back by how fun he was.
Mm-hmm.
So we started dating, and that was in the spring, and by Christmas we were engaged, and then we got married the next June. But we had a really nice courtship, and we just kind of got to know each other. And one of the things that I observed in him, he came from a broken home, as they call it.
Mm-hmm.
His parents had divorced when he was young. He had an older brother and an older sister, and his father had remarried and had a much younger wife, and he had a whole 6 siblings, half siblings, and he was so kind and so sweet with those children that I knew he would be a good father. And he also was very respectful of his parents, and even his stepmother, and he had a good relationship with his mother and had spent time with her. So I just, but he had some insecurities from that divorce, but I thought, I just let that right out.
I love
easier
that.
said than done.
Yeah.
I think a person has to kind of come to terms with those things within themselves and within their relationship with God and their and I think that was something that he dealt with and I dealt with, but he was always just a very good father and husband.
Well, and obviously it worked out because you guys were very happy together and had 5 awesome kids.
Actually, we had 6.
6
We
awesome
lost
kids,
the little,
yes.
The Earl. Yeah. Yes, we had a good relationship. He got his PhD in Missouri, and then we moved to Wayne, Nebraska, where he taught for 8 years at Wayne State College. which is a very remote outpost for the church. In those days, we had a little branch. We lived in Wayne, Nebraska, and we traveled 35 miles to church every Sunday. And he was the branch president there for some of those times. And then we helped build a little chapel in Norfolk, where the branch was. So we had some wonderful experiences there. I was able to be elected to be the president of the Faculty Wives and Women Club at Wayne while we were there, which got me acquainted with all the faculty of the college that were the women, and we did some wonderful things with that group, and that was a great experience to live there and associate. There was one other family who were members of the church in Wayne, so most of my friends and associates, all of ours, were not members. Mm-hmm. I belonged to a Bible study that we had a Lutheran, a Methodist, a Sikh, a First Christian, and myself. And we had a wonderful study of the Bible with those ladies that was just absolutely a really growing, wonderful experience for me. And every year we would try to come out west, where our family always was, and sent letters every spring to try and find jobs. And during that time, there was a kind of a real, a lot of historian people who were going through to get their degrees, and there weren't as many jobs as there were historians, and so he was having a difficult time finding a job out west, in spite of making efforts every year. Finally, we finally almost decided that the Lord wanted us there and needed us there, because we had this very small branch of the church, and he was the leader of the branch for a good part of the time, and we just were really needed there, and it was a good feeling to be needed, but we were getting anxious because Brad our oldest, was in the 7th grade, or going into the 7th grade, into junior high, and he was having some feelings of persecution almost from things that were happening in the community, where we had come out to Utah one summer on vacation, and we'd come through Salt Lake and picked up a bunch of brochures and things about Salt Lake, and that was the year that his class was studying in their I guess a geography part of their studies, Salt Lake and the history of Salt Lake. And so he told his teacher that he had these things that he could share and talk about it. And she said she rebuffed him because she knew he was a member of the church. And he took that so personally. And then he had some other experiences that scared him. And he probably mistakenly equated them to being a church member. But it was getting to be a difficult thing for him. So we really needed to move. And so we were out on vacation in Salt Lake and interviewed for a job with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as using his historical background to collect records and for the Genealogy Society. And so that's what brought us to Bountiful, and where we've been ever since.
And you, how long were you and Grandpa married before he passed away?
We were married in 1962, and he died in 1996.
Okay. So 34 years.
Yes.
How do you feel like your relationship with Grandpa changed over the course of your relationship?
Well, it grew, of course, having children together and experiencing the things of life and going to new places and doing new things. It really has to deepen if you see it as a long-lasting relationship, you've got to do things together, and we tried to go on dates, and we tried to socialize with friends, and we did a lot of things as a family, and we would come out probably every year to Utah or to Arizona to visit extended family, to keep those relationships strong. And it was a period where you didn't make phone calls, it was too expensive, so most of the contact we had with family was through letters. And I wrote letters constantly, and got letters from home, which were always wonderful. Christmases were hard. I remember baking cookies and watching the snowfall outside and listening to all be home for Christmas and crying.
Yeah, that was
And,
probably so hard.
So, and our family didn't really get to come out and see us much. We saw a couple of family members over the years, but in 8 years, probably the only contact we had for the most part was just coming out on vacations, and that was pretty much the norm. People weren't flying around, and we were in an isolated place. When I did have when Brent was born, who was my third child, her fourth child, Mother did come, and she had to fly into Omaha and then take a bus up to Wayne, and it was dead of winter in January, and my dad wasn't really happy about her making the trip in that kind of weather, but that was a real highlight to have Mother come and be with us for that. But that was the only child that she was present when I had. So I just, but again, circumstances were such that I knew she still had family at home. She was still raising my younger sisters, and knew how busy life was, and it was not an easy thing to get to us anyway.
Yeah.
But that was kind of our I've told you more about it than you probably want to hear.
No, I think that's great. You and Grandpa probably had to rely a lot on each other, and
and on our family members, we really became close because we made that trip to Norfolk every week, going to church. We would go early in the morning, and then we would stay all day, pretty much. So I would pack lunches for the kids and bring toys and games and things for them to play, because we'd go to our meetings, and then Monty would stay for his presidency meetings after the regular meetings. And then, so we didn't have Sunday dinner, like we do now for all those years, pretty much, because it was 5 or 6 and getting dark a lot of the time when we get home. And we would often go through snowdrifts and wonder if we would make it. I remember one particular Sunday we needed to be there. We both had assignments in the meetings, and went out and our car wouldn't start, and we were just really panicked because we didn't know what to do. So we went in and had a family prayer and prayed for the car, and came out and it started, and we had no problem with it. I don't know what caused the problem, but those kind of things happened to us on a regular basis, where we knew that the Lord was there and that He was helping us to manage our life. And so we had a lot of really wonderful experiences in that mission field experience in that small branch that were very important to our faith and testimony.
And your relationship with Grandpa was very founded in your faith, both of you, and came together and had that really strong foundation. And I'm sure that grew as well as you guys were, getting older and having more experiences together, and your faith being tried. And yeah,
we were committed by the covenants we had made together when we were married, and to the Lord. And so we were committed that through thick and thin, that we were going to stick it out and be together. And that was really tested, of course, when Grandpa Monty, when he was only 52, began to show signs of Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an early onset experience because, and it was probably somewhat hereditary. He had aunts that had Alzheimer's, and probably his grandfather on his mother's side, who died at 60-something, 61, 62, probably had it, but they didn't diagnose it as such. But they would tell stories about him going out without his pants in his life, saying you can't leave without pants, or being forgetful about things. So I really think there was that hereditary component in it.
So, tell me about being Grandpa's caregiver. How was that?
Well, you may have read, I don't know if you've had a chance to read, but I wrote a book after the 10 years of caregiving called Journey into Twilight, an Alzheimer's Primer, to kind of, I did it because I felt compelled to do it, and I assumed some of the reason was that I needed a record of what had happened through those years. Not only the experiences that I had as a caregiver that could be helpful to anybody who was experiencing the same thing, that could benefit from what I had learned, but also the idea that my children needed to know how I was aided and helped through that time. I think, as I think back on my life, there's been a number of things that have really been impactful, but I doubt if there's anything that I have experienced in life that was more impactful in teaching me more valuable lessons than that journey through Alzheimer's. Because I had to, first of all, I had to confront the possibility when he was given that diagnosis of knowing that things from day to day would not get better. Mm-hmm. There was probably little I could do to make I shouldn't say there was little. We tried many, many different approaches that were offered to us to help go through it. One, we went to the University of Utah to a program where they were helping develop tools and things that would help caregivers to care for their loved ones who were going into dementia by having, they made up a little video that they could watch that would be something you could put on to, Grandpa Monty watched it one time and enjoyed it thoroughly, and then he watched it another time and he said, I've seen this movie. And so that one didn't work. And then we did a program where he was supposed to keep a journal and things, and that became too hard. And we went to and adopted some, we went to it through a program of medication where they were doing trials on medication for Alzheimer's to see if that would help. And so we signed up and he participated in that, which was helpful, I think, with helping them find what worked and what didn't, and also probably slowed down the process. There wasn't really any hope at that point that there was a cure, but I thought if maybe we slowed it down enough, they could find a cure because he was young enough. Mm-hmm. After a while, that began to be, toward the end, it was getting where the benefits weren't compensation for what he was experiencing in terms of pain in his stomach and things that the medication was probably responsible for. Mm-hmm. So we tried a lot of things, but mostly I felt like the Lord was walking with me, and I had so many experiences where I was given an individual answer to prayers, or just little things that were telling me that the Lord was aware of what I was doing and how I was trying, and it gave meaning and purpose to what was happening to, and I learned compassion, I learned patience, I learned, not perfectly, of course. I still struggle with some of that, but those lessons that I learned are worth so much to me that I wouldn't trade the experience. I wouldn't volunteer to go through it again if I have a choice, but what I learned was worth everything I went through to learn those things, and to become more like my Savior is what I saw that is a refining process to help me do. So that is worth more than I can tell you.
Mm-hmm. And I know a few years ago, when we were at our family reunion in Boulder, you shared some poems that you had written during and I think after.
Well, it actually happened where that came about. That was another miraculous thing. I feel like it was just absolutely a gift that I was given to help me through that time. The morning that Grandpa was to go into the care center, Brad was coming to, just again seemed like a miraculous thing. He was coming to give a presentation at BYU for Frito-Lay to ask to get people to go to work there. And he happened to be there the morning Grandpa was going in the care center. I was so grateful that he could be here with me. So we went and, we were going to go meet Grandpa, and they were bringing him from Davis Hospital where he had been for some evaluation. And that morning I woke up thinking about Brad and feeling how much pain it was maybe going to put him through to see his dad in that situation and be going into that care center. And suddenly the thoughts that I had started becoming poems. Mm-hmm. And I got up and wrote down what I was thinking, and then everything I did, everywhere I went, everything came out in a poem. And I have a book that thick of the poems that I wrote during that time, and that continued through his illness, the 4 months he was in care center, the 3 years after he died before I married Grandpa Loy. Mm-hmm. And once I married him, it was like I didn't need it anymore. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of went away. But I found if I didn't get up immediately and write down those thoughts, they would not stay with me. Mm-hmm. So I knew it wasn't me. It was coming through me, but it was to comfort and help me express myself in a way that I had always wished I could do, because I've always admired poems. From the time I was little and learned all those poems, I had always admired poets who could say in such succinct words and put into feeling and thought. Poetry just always had a great draw for me, and it just felt like I finally understood how people can be inspired to write music, how they can come up with art, how those creative gifts can come from God to inspire them to do things that will help mankind and to benefit all of our lives. And it was just such a sweet, tender mercy for me to have that gift. And it, even when I kind of began to lose it, I didn't feel sad, because I thought it was such a miraculous thing that I had it in the first place, that I thought the Lord knew I could move on and do other things and spend my time doing other things that would be beneficial. And it was okay. It was okay for it. I can do it, but it's hard now. Yeah. If I sit down and try and write a poem, I really have to work at it. Where those were just coming out of me, and that was such a healing experience for me to be able to put those thoughts and feelings into words in that way and put them down and become part of that book I wrote.
Yeah. Well, and it's special for us too to be able to read through those poems, and I know you gave all of us a copy, and it's special for us to have those, be able to, you know, look through those and be able to kind of get into your mind as you were going through that experience and get some, I think, strength going through hard times that we have, and I know that helps me a lot to know
Well,
that.
I hope so, because they actually, I can't take credit for them. It was a gift to me and a gift to you if you get things from it, because that was exactly what it was.
Yeah. Well, and your life since then has changed quite a bit since Grandpa passed away, and you're remarried and have been married for, you were just telling me, 24 years.
24 years.
Yes, which is awesome.
Well, let me kind of back up and tell you kind of, I tried social media for a few months, maybe within, it'd probably been 2 years or more after Grandpa passed away. I thought, well, maybe I'll give social media a try. I wasn't too crazy about thinking about spending the rest of my life alone. I was 55 when he died.
Yeah, which is
so I was pretty young, and I thought, I'd give that a whirl, and I did. And that didn't work out too well. And so I just kind of prayed, and I said, if you want me to spend the rest of my life alone, that's okay. I accept that. But if you have something else in mind for me, I'd appreciate your help, because I wasn't doing too good on my own. And I thought, I heard horror stories about ending up with people that, just weren't really good because you were just lonesome and desperate. I didn't want to be that. So I was in a stake relief society presidency and went to I was called to go to a welfare meeting. And Loy had begun a program on Welfare Square called Family Support Services. That was a program that was having mentors come who would help people who came to Welfare Square who were just desperate. They didn't have to be members of the church, but needed help in becoming self-reliant. And he had developed the idea for the program, gotten approval of it, and he had missionaries who were working there, but he needed more. And they gave him Davis County as a place to find missionaries. So he came to this welfare meeting to find them. And as he began to talk about it, I had been feeling very strongly that I needed to do some work with the poor and the needy. I had no idea what kind of work I was to do. I didn't know where I was to go to find that kind of an opportunity. I had almost signed up. In fact, I had signed up to be a temple worker, and then was impressed that that was not the time for me to do it. So I called the temple and said, I'll just, please put me on hold. I'll just have to come back to this if it's right, when it's right. Mm-hmm. It was just a next day or so that I went to this meeting where he came to get mentors to help at this program. As he talked, I quickly realized that who he was. I had never met Grandpa before. His wife, Sylvia, had grown up in Snowflake, and I knew her, and I knew her whole family. In fact, her mother used to give me perms when I was little. And I had dated his brother in college.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
And so I knew him, and we kind of had a little bit of a dialogue right in the middle of that meeting. It reminds me of those movies where the light shines on the two people, and they're the only one, as if they're the only one in the room. And that's kind of a conversation we had in the middle of that meeting. I don't know what the people around thought, but at the end of the meeting, he passed out his business card, which he said he'd never done. Well, in the meeting, he told the group that he had just lost his wife in a month or two earlier, and my Relief Society president goes like this in my ribs with her elbow. But after the meeting, I had his card, so I emailed him. He had his, and I told him I was interested in checking out being a mentor. And so I went to Welfare Square. He took me to lunch, and then he took me to some meetings where they were discussing all the problems that they were facing with all these homeless people and all these people that needed help. And I actually went home in tears because I knew I was supposed to do this, but I didn't know after 10 years of caregiving if I could, because I didn't feel, but it was exactly what I needed to teach me how to help people without being responsible for them, to leave the responsibility on them, but be a help and a support to them as they worked on what they wanted. And the whole idea of it was agency.
Yeah.
That you did not infringe on people's agency. You talked to them in ways that you decided what was important to them, and then helped them achieve it by giving them the support, giving them the help, giving them the information that they might need. But it was such a wonderful growing experience for me after 10 years of caregiving to get out of that mode of taking care of somebody who was helpless, who needed my help, but that was not appropriate for my children. It wasn't appropriate for other people, and I needed to learn how to do that again. So it was just the perfect answer for what I needed. We were in that mission. He had started it before I came on, and his wife had been part of it before. And he was training missionaries who were coming to be part of the inner city program as well, which was doing the same thing with a bigger population in Salt Lake, but with people who were right in downtown Salt Lake, who were just as poor as they could be and had been poor for a long time, people who were coming out of jail, people who were on drugs, people who were coming out of prison. We worked with a population, helping them to reshape their lives according to what they wanted with the help of these missionaries. And I immediately began having to help train them because that was what Lloyd's role was in the inner city. We did that for 5 years, and then we were called on a mission to New York and ended up doing the same thing out there with the, people said, oh, you can do it in Salt Lake because you have all these missionaries, all these people that can come to help. But we wanted an opportunity to show that the principles that are behind self-reliance would work anywhere. So we prayed to go to a place that we could demonstrate that. New York City was the perfect place. And we had so many wonderful experiences there helping people. We had a small bilingual branch that consisted of people who spoke Spanish and English and a few other languages. But we would do all the meetings in Spanish and English, translating them. Loy speaks Spanish, thank goodness, and I learned a little Spanish before I left. But it was just a wonderful thing to see that those principles that were valid, no matter where you were. And we had people in that little branch who learned how to do things. Most of them were new converts. Our branch president had only been a member of the church for 2 years. Our Relief Society president had been, the counselor in the Relief Society had been a member 6 months. Her husband, who was the counselor in the branch presidency, a little longer than that. The primary president had been, I think she was maybe 9 months. She had never, that's another story I'd tell you, but it's taken too long. But she told the kids a wonderful story about for Christmas, about the birth of Christ, that was very creative and really, really cute. But she, she didn't know the primary songs. So we had another great experience doing that. And then when we came home from there, we had 3 different missions with DI headquarters where we worked with them in establishing mentor programs in the DI. And then we got to help do the humanitarian history of the church that started with that famine in Ethiopia, where the church had the fast and brought millions of dollars in from that fast, and they didn't have a program to administer that money. So that's what began the humanitarian program. They actually hired one guy, and he started running it. And then from there, it's grown to what we have today, where they're doing projects everywhere, all over the world. But that was a fun experience. And Grandpa, he's another PhD, and Grandpa Loy has another PhD in economics, and so I like older men who are PhDs.
That's what Grandma has learned through her life. Older men with PhDs is the way to go.
That's
you
right.
You heard it here first.
Yep.
Grandma is giving the best advice. I love it. Speaking of advice, Grandma, thank you for sharing a lot of your stories. I wish we had hours and hours to talk through all of the different things, but what would you say, looking back on your life, is what would you define as a happy and successful life?
Well, I think my view of a successful life is to pattern after the Savior, Jesus Christ, and become as much like him as we possibly can in loving Heavenly Father and loving our fellow beings by serving and helping them. I really think that that's the essence of why we are here and what we are to learn. And that has a spin-off effect of probably every decision we make, everything that we do. But, you can have lots of money and still be unhappy. We saw people in poverty who were happy because they did choose faith and courage. It's just such a defining thing in life to come to a feeling of peace and happiness that's hard to define, because it's not that your life doesn't have problems. I think Alzheimer's taught me that, that as hard as that was and as difficult as that was, there was a peace and a feeling of being carried through that is really hard to explain. And I think that's because we know a lot of things spiritually in a different way than we know other things. We can study science and we can learn laws of different things, but the laws of God are known through the Spirit primarily. And a lot of people don't understand that. And they haven't experienced it, so I don't blame them for not understanding it. But when you understand it and you know that you can know things more certainly that way than you can through your senses or through other things, I think people get offended sometimes by people who say they know certain things. But I heard a quote the other day that I really resonated with. It said, "Those who have experience should not be at the mercy of those who have opinions." And I thought, that's really true, because the experiences that I've had that have confirmed to me that there is a loving Father who loves us, and our Savior who is our Redeemer and who has given his life for us so that we can change and grow and become like him. And his whole focus was on doing good, loving people, being kind, being the kind of person that makes life good and happy. I was lucky to grow up in the 50s because that was the kind of people I was around. That was the kind of society we had. The war was over. People had come to know God during that war because they knew they weren't in control. And it was just such a happy, peaceful, sweet time to be alive and to enjoy knowing the society around us. And I feel so sad for people today who are growing up in such a divisive, contentious, kind of a harsh world. And I think that you who are trying your best to find your way, I applaud everything that you're doing. But let me tell you that I don't know how I would have made it through without heaven's help, because it's just such a important and crucial part of my peace and my happiness. I just don't know any other way to say it.
Well, thank you so much, Grandma. These have all been such amazing thoughts, and I wish, like I said, we could sit and talk. We're going to have you come on the podcast again so you can talk about all these different things, but I love you so much, and I'm grateful we could have this conversation, and thank you for sharing some more things with me about your life. And
well, I appreciate you, and I love you. I hope you always know that. Whatever happens in your life, you know I've got you. And I love you.
Thanks, Grandma. I love you too.